had one introduction put together already. I have to make a note of another poignant introduction. This is a very important topic to me, the topic of secession, the topic of sovereign liberty, the topic of human and civil rights. It has cost me hardship, pain, and struggle with my friendships, and may have even cost me some friendships. And I hope that by sharing some of this with some of you, you'll come to understand that secession is not an instance of tearing apart, but of building up and of bringing forth anew from that which can no longer survive as it was. 235 years ago, a handful of men risked their lives, their personal fortunes, and their sacred honor in defiance of the most powerful government and military force ever known on the earth to that time. 56 men, members of the Continental Congress, forged one of the most well-known documents in all of history, in the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence included within it language which expressed what proponents of true liberty considered fundamental, meaning undeniable and uncontroversial, and the most basic principles and concepts of freedom. The most caustic and deliberate inclusion in this document, and arguably the one which King George took the greatest exception, was that government derived its authority from the consent of the governed. Imagine the incredulity of the king, a monarch who ruled with near impunity and without contest over his people, upon hearing such a suggestion, that his power should be derived from the people and not as a consequence of his lineage. Public opinion on the subject of independence was varied, to say the least. There were secessionists. Yes, that's right, the war for independence was an act of secession from the British Crown. There were loyalists, who were known as the Tories. And then there were those who just didn't care one way or the other. They didn't have an opinion strong enough to choose personal liberty and sovereignty over the comfort and relative security of their serfdom. The secessionists were extremely passionate. They believed the king's laws were restrictive and the taxes tyrannical and prohibitive. The loyalists believed that the king's laws were righteous and reasonable for the period of relative peace and security that they had enjoyed. To them, they had nothing to gain from a separation from the British Empire. Does any of this sound familiar yet? Any of it at all? After a long, bloody conflict, in 1777, the Articles of Confederation and the Perpetual Union, perpetual, that means forever, were written and ratified by the 13 member colonies, 13 independent states, at the time independent republics, or if you will, independent countries of their own right, signed a document guaranteeing unto each other fair commerce, good faith, and most of all, common defense. After a few years, the formers of this compact determined that the agreement was too loose and did not provide for enough direction and security for the fledgling nation. So what did they do? They seceded. They abandoned the Articles of Confederation, and in 1787, 10 years later, a scant 10 years later, penned a new document, a brand new compact, under which they hoped the new nation could be governed and defended. So controversial was this process, at the time it took over 2 years for all of the member states to agree on and many more for them all to ratify this new constitutional republic. This new nation struggled with both its identity and security throughout most of the following 80 years. The War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Franco-American Naval War. America was besieged from the very beginning by forces which sought to tear it asunder or drive it into oblivion. And there were crises as well from within. In 1814, because of complications brought on by the War of 1812, several New England states met at the Hartford Convention to discuss secession from the Republic. They had plotted for nearly 14 years, quite publicly and openly, about seceding from the Union. Neither Presidents Jefferson nor Madison ever made overtures suggesting that an attempt to secede from this Union would be met by retaliation of force. Quite the contrary, Jefferson, when asked what would happen if New England seceded, said in a letter that New Englanders, like all other Americans, would be our children, and we would wish them well. We would wish them well. You weren't happy with the way things were. You wanted to make your own way. We'd wish them well. Much like parents wish their children well when they reach the age to go out into the world on their own and try to make their own fortunes. We would wish them well. More recently, the Soviet republics and all of Eastern and Central Europe peacefully seceded from the Soviet Union. Secession does not necessitate war. Lincoln himself is quoted from his time as a U.S. Senator as defending the concept of secession as a means of political self-determination. In December of 1860, Union Major Robert Anderson, after having been demanded by South Carolina's Governor Francis Pickens to abandon the post, retreated under cover of darkness from the indefensible batteries at Fort Moultrie to the fortifications at Sumter within Charleston Harbor. Lincoln notified Pickens that he would be sending supplies and reinforcements to Sumter. This resulted in an ultimatum from the newly formed Confederate government: evacuate Sumter immediately. Major Anderson refused, and the shore batteries opened fire at 4:30 a.m. on April 12th.